Silence is part of music. We don't usually think about it, but without silence, music would lose a very powerful resource. First, there's framing silence, the silence that normally precedes and follows listening to a piece of music. This kind of silence sets it apart from the surroundings, underlining the way we value music as a special experience, not just a slice of ordinary life. Of course, there are examples of music in everyday life that are not framed like this, the music here in the subway and restaurants and so on. But these kinds of music are only intended as background. Nobody goes to a restaurant for the music, it's just added atmosphere. But in art music, meant to be listened to with full attention, the whole point is to give the listener an experience that is not just ordinary, but rather that transports them into a special world where they go through an experience that is out of the ordinary. Most music students have had the experience of going to a concert and listening to a new piece where the audience doesn't know whether it's over or not. They start a clap, they stop, uncertain. This is usually because the composer is inept, unable to create a convincing ending. So the silence is ambiguous and not in a good way. It's passive, just the absence of sound. Apart from framing silence, however, there are often silent moments within a piece of music. How can we make these moments meaningful? Let's look at a few examples. Here we have a 4-bar phrase reaching a perfect authentic cadence. The next bar is completely empty. There's a kind of disappointment that a new phrase doesn't start when expected. Also, the fact that the first cadence is so definitive and strong doesn't create any suspense. This is an example of silence badly used. No expectations, plus an entire empty bar adds up to a dead silence. Once again, the listener could easily think the piece was over and maybe even applaud. Okay, let's try improving it by eliminating the empty bar. This is better, at least we're not just waiting around during a whole empty bar. But it's still quite square. Good music creates expectations and plays with them. This example does not. Okay, a third version. Here there are two improvements. First, the cadence in the 4th bar has been lightened up. The top part no longer ends in the tonic, but on the 3rd degree. Also, the second phrase actually starts a bit early on the upbeat rather than on the downbeat of the 5th bar. Musically, this is much more interesting. However, the silence is reduced to 1 beat. It's barely noticeable. So this is still not really a good example of using silence effectively. Now let's see something better. Here the crescendo leads up to a climactic chord in the last bar. The effect is quite strong. Also, the short silences in the build-up add some rhythmic tension. But look what happens when we delay the climax a bit. Now the silence here creates a kind of accent. Nothing happens in the first beat of measure 5. The pause is just long enough to create a kind of surprise, and then, when the climactic chord does arrive, it's even more dramatic. A pause before an expected climax can intensify it enormously. Now let's look at a longer example. Here's the coda from my 8th Symphony. This last section follows about 20 minutes of more or less continuous music. Let's listen. When the coda arrives at its climax, the most important one in the whole piece, silence follows the climactic chord. This chord is unexpectedly short, so the silence here is perceived as an interruption. Clearly, the musical energy already built up in the coda can't be so quickly dissipated, so the stop creates great suspense. When the chord is repeated, twice more with a little upbeat added, it just reinforces the tension. Only at the third repeat does the explosive chord trigger a final little quiet phrase, allowing the movement to end softly, creating a sense of resolution. We can see that the most important thing to understand about silence within a musical work is that its effect depends entirely on what precedes it. If what precedes it creates no curiosity or expectations, the silence will be dead. The listener just loses interest in the music and gets distracted. If the composer creates some kind of suspense, the silence will be filled with tension as the listener focuses on their expectations for what's coming next. And the silence can then become a potent means of intensifying the listener's experience.